Hey, everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits, the only podcast with old friends discussing old comics with the people that created them. I'm Joe Marcello, joined as always by my partners in crime, Orrin Phillips.
Hey, everybody.
And Mike Farah.
Howdy, howdy.
Well, my friends, it is that day again. It is comic book day. It is hump day. It's Wednesday. But more importantly, it's Dollar Bin Bandit Day. So you're going to be hearing our latest episode with comic book artist Brian Bolland. Now, you may be familiar with his work from The Killing Joke. Fabulous, fabulous artwork. I was a huge fan of his work from a way back, and it was really just a really great opportunity to talk to somebody from across the pond.
Yeah, his early stuff on Judge Dredd is absolutely phenomenal. It really set the tone for the character. He goes into that a bit. And, you know, when you look at his art, it just almost belongs in a museum. It's so beautiful. And that's not just me trying to suck up. I mean, that's how I actually feel.
Yeah. And, you know, he's known as primarily a cover artist now. There are some exceptions like the Killing Joke, but I remember him from sort of the continuity of his covers on some of the series as they changed interiors and creative teams, such as on Animal Man that started with Grant Morrison and went through a number of different writers and artists. You know, that streak he did on that. And also, I think he had a really good run of covers on Wonder Woman. So as Orrin said, really kind of portrait quality imagery that he creates. And yeah, always fun to talk to someone not American, get a different point of view. So here we go. This is Brian Bolland.
So first and foremost, I have to ask, how did you get into comics?
Well, I got into comics the way all kids get into comics at age 10. Oh, I will just say that the story goes that in 1959, American comics started being imported into my country in the hull, no, you know, the bottom part of boats to allow the boat to go to the correct level in the water. So they threw in a lot of pulpy magazines in the boats and shipped them over to this country. And those were the first American comics. And they would have been mainly DC and whatever else was on the go in 1959. You probably know more about it than I do. But I became a DC collector. Actually, Dell Comics. My first comic was a Dell comic called Dinosaurus in 1960. And I loved anything that had a giant dinosaur-like sort of monster on the cover. And there were quite a lot in those days. It was really before Marvel. It was before Marvel, the current incarnation of Marvel. So the superhero really wasn't the dominant meme in comics. It was the giant monster. So I started out that way with a collection of a few Dell. Turok, Son of Stone I think was a Dell comic.
Yep.
At the time. And then I moved into DC collecting. And I had a huge, pretty darn complete DC comics collection and some Marvels, but I was never a great Marvel collector. That's how it started for me. And as a kid, you know, you imitate what you see on the page. And I started drawing a little bit like Gil Kane, right from the early days.
Do you still have those comics?
I sold the entire collection about 5 years ago. I'm, you know, whatever you do, you always regret certain decisions you make. And now there seems to be, now that we're all online and we're all showing each other our collections of things, I see other people have some of the issues that I had complete runs of, and a large part of me would like to still have them, but no, I sold them. But I do still have the very first comic, the Dinosaurs, which I can whip out and show to you if you like.
Pretty awesome.
You own a spinner rack? Oh wow, look at that.
Yeah. Let's take it out of its bag. You can see it better.
It's in very good condition too.
It is in good condition, isn't it? Yes. There you go. Beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Now, I can't quite remember the name of the artist who drew the cover. Joe Jusko, you know, the artist, very fine artist, Joe Jusko, knows his name well. The interior art was by a fellow called Jesse Marsh.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, a lot of the Dell books, they didn't put the artists on there.
I'm sorry?
A lot of Dell books, they didn't give the artists the credit for a lot of stuff.
Well, I don't think DC did for a long time. Very few artists signed, or you didn't get a good credit box at the time. But we sort of, me and a couple of friends who were fans, we always knew the name of the artist. We could tell which was Alex Toth and which was Gil Kane and which was Mike Zakowski, or all of the others. And one of my favorites was the artist on Doom Patrol. His name was Bruno Premiani, and I mentioned his name whenever possible because I thought he was a great artist. Italian guy.
So how did 2000 AD come into your life?
Well, we've had comics in this country since 1914. There's been a whole range of funny comics, the Beezer and the Buster and the Topper, but also sort of action comics, war comics, and that sort of thing. But for a long time, we used to have a terrific comic called Eagle in the 1950s. The character Dan Dare was from that, but it wasn't selling at all well, and right through until the mid 70s, there was no science fiction. We never had superheroes really in this country. We had a character called the Spider, who was apparently written by Jerry Siegel, who came up with Superman. And it was drawn by a fellow called Reg Bunn, but there wasn't a science fiction or superhero-y kind of comic at the time until the film Star Wars came along. And because Star Wars was proving very, very popular, the publishers thought maybe we should try our hands at a new science fiction comic. And they came up with this futuristic title, 2000 AD. My agent, who was also the agent of Dave Gibbons, who did Watchmen, of course, got Dave and me and Carlos Esquerra, also the Spanish artist, involved in the new 2000 AD comic.
And that was where the birth of Judge Dredd began. Yes,
well, Judge Dredd was one of the characters in that, created by John Wagner and Carlos Esquerra. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't clear that Judge Dredd was going to be the popular character in the comic any more than any of the others.
A question about Judge Dredd is because, as you know, England, there's not a lot of people, not a lot of gun ownership there.
No.
In the States, we've had this, and I wouldn't say Judge Dredd's a vigilante because he is a lawman, but he fulfills every aspect of the law. And we've had sort of that vigilante in our pop culture for a while. What was the idea of the vigilante like? How was it received in England?
Well, I'm not really sure that everybody perceives Judge Dredd the way we who created, write and draw him, see him. I always saw him not clearly as a hero at all. He's a fascist, basically. He's a part of the apparatus of a police state. So we always drew him in such a way that your point of sympathy is somewhere between him and his protagonists. Often I found my sympathy lay with the other guy. And there was this, we drew him so that you wouldn't like him at all. And when people identify with his sort of heroics, it's kind of a little worrying because there are some signs that he's a pretty nasty piece of work. And the whole state that he represents is really, like a police, a totalitarian police state. It's supposed to be set in America. So it's us looking across the pond and sort of seeing a futuristic dystopia with him as part of it.
And when did you start to realize that folks are maybe not picking up on the message that you guys were?
Well, I don't know. I mean, do you? Is that the way you? I mean, are you familiar with Judge Dredd yourself?
I never, reading it like you said, he was not a very kind person. He just there was nothing. He was brutal, and the way you drew him, I always thought was interesting because he always seemed like he had sort of a very thin face, but it was his armor that covered him and made him look tough.
Yes.
He was a small person underneath it all. And,
yes.
It's his that made him intimidating, but when I started seeing, like when they made the movie about him here in the States, he was kind of on the fence and then he sort of redeems himself and this and that.
Is that the Stallone one or the more recent one with Carl Urban?
the Stallone one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Man.
It was a terrific treat for me, and maybe some of the other artists, to see on screen. It was probably the first time I'd ever seen on screen a scene that pretty much I'd drawn, the bit where they all turn up on their bikes and they look up at the tall building and there's some kind of block war going on up there. But then as soon as he took his helmet off, rule number one is you never, ever see Judge Dredd without a helmet. And you never really see him smile. There have been a few rare exceptions when just for comedic effect, we've had him smiling like an idiot. But most of there is that sort of downturn. Also, this kind of swollen, almost sort of mutated lip he has that Mick McMahon, who really, I think, developed him in the early days. I think he gave him that in the first place. I've just drawn him again, actually. I won't show it to you because it's over there, but you can't see it until it's actually solicited.
How much did your drawing style grow as you worked on that book?
Well, you see, Dave Gibbons and I grew up on DC and Marvel comics, so we were very much influenced by the artists in those comics. Gil Kane, as I've mentioned before, Neil Adams. I was a great Neil Adams fan. So we a lot of the artists we'd had in British comics were not from the American school at all. Many of them were Italians, Spanish artists, and a lot of them had grown up looking at the war comics, which were drawn by Italians and Spanish artists. So I brought a kind of an American, Murphy Anderson, the ink of Murphy Anderson was a great influence on me, the smooth inking style of Murphy Anderson. And I think I brought a kind of mid-Atlantic kind of look to a British comic. I don't think it ever went the whole way. It doesn't look like a Marvel comic to me, never did, or a DC. How did my style develop? I was very much I was very impressed by Mick McMahon's work because it was completely idiosyncratic and evolving all the time. These extraordinary characters that he was coming up with. I was trying to apply I'm really a technical illustrator, really. That's how I came into the whole field. I was applying a kind of a technical, what skill I had in an attempt to expand into the kind of idiosyncratic style that he brought to it. That's the best I can suggest on that one.
Camelot 3000 is a book that seems to be becoming popular again.
Oh, really? That's great.
How was, at least here, how was that pitched to you?
Okay, well, I started doing a few bits and pieces for DC Comics due to a story where my friend Joe Staten, who was drawing Green Lantern at the time, was staying with me. And it indicated that there was some way that foreign artists like us could work in the American comics industry. And then, of course, a sort of British invasion occurred. People from DC, Dick Giordano, and a few others came over sort of scouting for talent that they'd seen in 2000 AD. They'd seen Dave and me. And I decided I was going to work full-time for DC if possible. And they pitched me this idea. And I assume they thought, it's King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Let's have Bolland, he's British, he'll know about that stuff. But I didn't know anything about it at all. But, it was a full-time job and it felt very prestigious for me to be doing it. And I loved it. I loved doing it. It was the first direct sales sort of mini maxi series, I believe, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. It was on sort of it was on Baxter, it was on a better quality paper.
Yeah, the glossy kind of paper.
Yeah. So that's how it was pitched that way. It was like a sort of full-time job.
So coming off of a variety of various DC superheroes, did you have to change your style at all as you progressed?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that Judge Dredd has a lot of comedy, a lot of humor in it. Mm-hmm. It's there's a sort of there's a mixture of sort of dark humor and horror in there. And I don't think there is the humor. Well, there is I think we brought a little bit of humor into Camelot, but I think it was a little bit straighter. The drawing style was a little bit more conventional. I think I wanted to fit in as best I could with the DC style. Probably not a terrific idea, because I think subsequent artists and people have broken out. People like Frank Miller, his style of when he did Ronin was quite a step, was a new step, really. Yeah. Looking back at the Camelot 3000, I think they don't look outrageously different from a regular comic at the time. Although I must admit, I've been looking at them recently, because I found a whole bunch of them that I've got sitting away in cupboards and things, and I'm quite impressed by the sort of enthusiasm of the young artist who drew them.
That was, one of my next questions. As an artist, like, what is your take on some of these styles that are prevalent nowadays? I mean, well, there were. It seems as if certainly, up until recent, the style kind of identified the decade in which they were a part of. So obviously the golden silver age, the 90s really, I mean, you can see, like Stevie Wonder can see that from across the room, over exaggerated, muscular figures, sandwiches with 1,000 pockets and oversized, guns.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, I'm very out of touch. I don't live anywhere near a comic shop, and I haven't been receiving the complimentary boxes for many years, so I don't really know what's going on. The only stuff I ever see is online. But I mean, I won't name the kind of stuff I don't particularly like, because I may actually know the name, personally know the artist who draws that stuff. But I don't really like the sort of really pumped up, enormously exaggerated. I'm not terribly interested in muscles.
Right.
I mean, there was a time when I didn't subscribe to Muscle Monthly or whatever it was, because you need to know what the human body looks like, what a superhero looks like, don't you? But it was never. I mean, we mentioned Judge Dredd, but I think Judge Dredd is actually. I've seen him drawn recently by people who draw him as an action hero.
Yeah, right.
And he's got the kind of muscles and everything, but in my view, he's more of a sort of sunken, kind of mean-looking, kind of slouchy figure. Right. And it's all the padding that makes him look big. But anyway, what do I think of contemporary styles? I'm going to stick my neck out here and say I'm not terribly keen on the manga influence. I really don't like the big eyes.
No, I'm not either. I'm just curious, from an artistic point of view, because I can appreciate people's opinions. Obviously, they have, for whatever reason, they gravitate to one side or the other. I don't like manga either. I mean, my daughter is a fan of it, and she kind of is into that style of art.
Yes.
But I guess that's just more of a sign of the times. And I have a lot more gray hair nowadays, so
I believe manga has brought more young women into reading comics. Is that a fact? And occasionally, I do see some of the very. I mean, even Superman. What little I've seen of recent Superman comics, there is a slight sort of manga-y look to him, which.
Yeah, they have a fair amount of rotating artists, and
do they?
They, prior to, I guess, Brian Michael Bendis, his run, which just completed. Before that, there was, a number of artists and writers too, but doing, different issues, and I could definitely see that manga influence in the style. Right. But at the same time, they also created another Superman for like the Asian market as well. So it's Superman, not Clark Kent Superman. It's just another person that was called Superman specifically for that region of the world. And he exists in the continuity of the rest of the DC universe. But yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, he he tends to have that more of a style to it. But
yeah,
you know.
but it is a really wonderful thing that there are people from all the whole world of comics really has merged to a large extent. I think, you know, the American comics have got artists from the Philippines and from all over the place. A friend of mine is from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. He just sent me his wonderful fellow called Tan Eng Quat, who has drawn for Marvel and DC. He even drew Judge Dredd, for instance. But artists from all over the world seem to be able to merge and work in different fields in different countries, don't they?
Yeah, I find it really interesting. So, you know, in a lot of the conversations that Or and I have had with various artists and writers over the past few months, you know, they would refer to, you know, their early days in the business, and everyone would be, you know, traditionally in a bullpen style setup, or for the most part, and then later on in their career would move off to wherever they were living, and then things would be mailed, you know, via FedEx or snail mail, what have you. But now everyone is, you know, we were just talking to Ron Mars yesterday or day before that about an artist and writer he was talking to, or working with, I should say. And I want to say he was in the Philippines or something like that. And, you know, it's just more common nowadays. And you don't, I don't know, you know, I guess you still have this perceived notion in your head about how things work. And it's just, it's a global, you know, it's a global society.
Just before I started working I started working at DC in 1979, but during the 70s, there was a big Filipino contribution. I mean, people like Rudy Nebres and Alex Nino and Alfredo Alcala. They were all, I believe they were all Filipino, weren't they? That was. I remember Alcala inking John Buscema on Conan in the black and whites very impressively. Yeah, that was a kind of a. I don't know whether there is such a big Filipino contribution these days.
I don't know, but I know that most of the artists are not from around here anymore. And,
is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's not a criticism. It's just, you know, it's an observation. And, you know, I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad, because I'm one of those people.
You know, thank God.
I'm not from around here either.
You're not. No, you're not in Yonkers, which is right next door.
By the way, Oren, you got a whole bunch of comics sort of sitting next to you, and I can see one that I think I drew.
Yes, indeed. This is trying to impress you. This is.
Oh God, yeah, that's one of my. Oh crikey, yeah. I think I drew that on the desk, DC Comics in New York many years ago. I think Ross Andrew was looking over my shoulder at the time.
Now, were you just given, you know, that's going to be Superman and Legion?
Do you know, I really can't remember. I think they must have. I don't know. I really can't remember. I mean, a lot of the time when I just do a cover, I'm given the entire script and I go through the whole thing, right. And I just put a little star against a scene that looks like it could make a good cover.
Gotcha.
But I really couldn't say how a thing like that. I mean, I did quite a few just sitting at DC.
Actually, you brought up a good point there, and I wanted to ask you, because we've spoken to many artists, and they, you know, they just say, yeah, I do this, I do X, Y, Z, I've done covers, but the process by which they choose whatever frame or imagery to put on the cover. So you just mentioned, like, you go through the script and you star whatever, I guess, sounds.
That's often the case. It's not always the case.
Okay. Yeah. I was curious of how that process works out, only because, you know, there are many times as a comic book reader, you know, you're attracted by the covers, and
of course,
and certainly your work is fantastic, and you expect to see that image that was portrayed on the cover somehow reflected in the comic
inside.
You know, and many times it's just a tease. You know,
I know.
So and so returns, and it's not until the very last page of the last panel where their like foot is present, and you're like, yeah, that was a ripoff, dude.
Well, I think back in my day, when I was buying comics as a kid, there would be a splash page if it was a full-length story, so-called, it would be in 3 parts, and each part would have a splash page. and often the artist would reproduce that moment from the splash page on the cover. Quite often the covers were drawn by, I mean, I mentioned Doom Patrol earlier, that the insides were all drawn by Bruno Premiani, but for some reason they always had Bob Brown doing the covers. I don't know quite why that was the case, but in my case, the thing I'm finding at the moment is that, you know, people say, will you do me a Superman cover? And I say, okay, what do you want on the cover? And they say, well, just give me an action shot. And I think, well, yeah, but what are they doing?
It's super.
You know,
does this?
Yeah, and you'll see about kind of 4 or 5 of them, and they'll just be going, "Arr!"
Yeah,
and there's no story there. And I do kind of like you know, some kind of incident going on, some kind of hook to make you think, that's unusual. But quite often I end up doing a group sort of photo shoot. I mean, I did recently the cover of Detective Comics number 1000, which had, I'm looking at it over your shoulder over there, and it's basically a bunch of villains all just sort of looking at the camera. Mm-hmm. A lot of the time, when we don't have an idea for a cover, we end up with like a couple of Wonder Woman covers I drew. One of them, she's just standing looking sideways with one foot up. And that seems to have been turned into a poster, and it seems to be quite iconic. I can't just put it in front of you straight away.
No, I know it. I know what
I think what I'm saying is often when you don't have a decent idea, you end up with the best cover.
Well, speaking of covers, I want to jump because I'm going to start gushing now. 1988, my cousin and I are on vacation. He hands me a copy of The Killing Joke.
Oh yeah.
And, oh my goodness, the art in that book, it changed everything for me. Prior to doing that project, what were your thoughts on Batman as a character?
Well, I'd grown up right through the 60s when he was drawn by, what's he called, Sheldon Moldoff and people like that. The kind of strange, bug-eyed creature sort of period of Batman. And then Carmine Infantino made him look sleeker, having come off The Flash. And then, of course, Neil Adams really revolutionized Batman. He'd become the Batman, and he was suddenly quite oh yes, and of course we'd had to suffer the 1966 or whenever, what TV show, or whenever it was. What was my impression of Batman? I think I could somehow tell that he was really a kind of creature of the night. I mean, when I did Killing Joke, I was a lot more interested in the Joker. Alan Moore and I got together, and Alan said, what sort of thing really do you have in mind? And I said, well, I think there's something more substantial about the Joker. He's got a theatricality about him, which, and you can draw facial expressions. I mean, you know, he doesn't just have the grin. Batman, to me, is more of a sort of background, shadowy figure. I'm not terribly impressed by the whole Wayne Foundation, the sort of billionaire Bruce Wayne stuff and all that. I mean, he's basically one of those characters like Dracula and the Shadow. He's a sort of, a shadowy sort of cloaked mystery. And I think you can represent him that way without really knowing any more about him than that. What the original question was, what was my impression of him?
Right.
Have I given you a satisfactory answer?
No, I think you have.
Will that do?
Yeah. And when you guys were talking and putting together ideas, did you ever say to yourself, if we go too dark with this, we might, upset readers, but if we don't go dark enough, it might not have the same impact?
Well, so everyone, it's that time of year again, the year of ghosts, goblins, graveyards, and of course, Yeet presents Halloween Spectacular, filled with the best stories from the best writers and the best artists coming together It is the greatest independent comic anthology out there. You know you want it. You know you need it. Click the link below. Join Patreon. Get yourself the comic for $5 a month.
You see, at the time, Alan had just emerged as a real talent. And I'd loved all of his, I mean, we all thought he was, great. He'd done a lot of good stuff, including Watchmen. And once we'd decided to do this thing together, I didn't get involved with the story at all. Alan just went away. He didn't go away because he was always in Northampton, but he wrote the thing. And I think he actually asked the editor, Len Wein, if he could do that terrible harm to Barbara Gordon. Yes. And put her in a wheelchair. And they said, okay, go ahead. It was, I mean, I didn't really have any say in how dark the story was going to go. I was just going to do my best to draw it the way he wrote it. So I guess I was a bit concerned. Yeah.
So what were your initial thoughts reading? Because I mean, there's a whole scene where you have Commissioner Gordon basically naked in a
I know
with the collar around his neck.
I know.
And you're just like, Jesus, that's Commissioner Gordon, man.
I know. I was also a bit disturbed by the dwarf figures because I thought it was a bit heightist.
Right.
I'm not sure there even was a word at the time, but I mean, I was not in a position to say, look, Alan, you've got to rewrite this,
right.
Because he was Alan Moore, basically,
right.
It seemed to get past DC. And I mean, I've drawn some pretty violent stuff, and I consider it a challenge to live up to any kind of, maybe I've got no moral compass, I don't know, but what I'm asked to draw, I will always do my best to draw it.
Right. And with your drawings in that too.
And also this thing about violence, I mean, I'm a hippie, I'm an old hippie, basically. I found the idea, because I used to draw war comics, and I used to draw the violence, the action, the war, in such a way that it was really so over the top that it would really put you off the violence. So I would never shy away from. In fact, I think one of the pages in The Killing Joke originally, Barbara was topless.
Oh.
And that particular panel was replaced. I drew a close-up face, which, if anything, was a little bit more horrifying because the mind would then make up what was going on in that scene. But funnily enough, I always think that the most disturbing scene in the comic was the cover, because the cover is the moment when the very worst thing in the story is taking place.
Yeah.
But you're seeing it from the other direction. You're looking at something which is now very familiar and iconic and all that, and but a bit of fun, really. But when you read the story, you suddenly think, hang on a minute, that's the moment where we go probably a little too far.
Whose idea was it to have the Joker in? Because before that, he had the traditional, the purple suit and the tie and this. But here it was almost like a vacation outfit.
Why the hell was he wearing that stuff? I don't know.
It was so different.
I've often thought of that myself. Why was he wearing a pair of shorts and
a hat and the camera
and a funny hat? Yeah. I did a Joker cover recently for DC, and I spent lots of time drawing the green hair, and the people who commissioned the cover, I think it was one of these variant covers for a special edition for a shop somewhere. They said, "Can you give him a hat?" And because it looked a bit like the way he looked on the cover of The Killing Joke. But I spent like 2 days drawing his hair, and I had to cover it all up with a hat. I was very annoyed.
That's always fun.
Yeah, I really don't remember. You'll have to ask Alan Moore. Good luck with that, I'll tell you.
I was going to say, if we ever have that,
Yeah.
There was I just want to jump in. There was an image that, I don't know if it was an alternate cover or maybe just a commission, but I think it was, on par with Killing Joke. But it was Joker sitting down, and behind him is like basically heads on a wall of all the heroes.
Yeah.
I love that. And there is a a oh god, what is this? Like a cosplay guy in New York area.
Oh, yes.
Who has recreated that. Now he does a thing where the guy, puts on face makeup and he looks like your
Now you're talking about Anthony Misiano, I believe, aren't you?
Yes.
Is that
I believe
I met Anthony and Alicia, I think is her partner's name.
She dresses up as
she dresses up as Harley, and I met them at a convention in Mexico City, and there was this incredible Joker. And I've got lots of photographs of him and me together. And, I'm a very boring looking figure in between these two extraordinary characters. But I have seen his recreation of that image with the heads. And I don't know whether he's got real people to stick their heads through a cardboard background or something.
I don't know, man, but it looks amazing. I mean,
it looks good, doesn't it?
His visualization and just, everything of that scene is spot on. It's just fantastic, and
he does look great as the Joker, though, I'll tell you.
But just
that whole thing was that
recreated your style, I would say. I mean, as in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, in Killing Joke, one thing that I love that you did is there's so much in shadow. There would be scenes where you'd only see this much of a face, or you wouldn't see the whole thing, and I thought that fit so perfectly with the words and the story that was going on. Was that consciously?
Well, now where were we? Oh yes, when Alan. I've only drawn one thing by Alan, I think, but he describes everything visually. He really directs. He will say, the figure is. The face is obscured by the shadow from the hat or something like that. Some of my favorite scenes in that book are the barroom scenes where the three characters are sitting around a table eating crayfish or something. And I'm sure he described that so thoroughly. I tried to add a few things to it that he hadn't asked for, but he was very good at directing me, telling me what to draw.
And where did you learn to do facial expressions so well? Because you really capture, not just in Killing Joke, but in a lot of your works, what's going on so perfectly that you don't even need text to see, horror or anger or something like that. You nail that.
I don't know. That's an interesting question, because I was talking to Kevin Maguire, the artist Kevin Maguire, and he's very big on facial expressions. I remember in a copy of Wizard, he did a whole tutorial on how to draw facial expressions. To me, I don't know how to draw a face that doesn't have a facial expression. Right. Every face, even when they're being completely, I keep looking over your shoulder at the stuff I've got attached to the wall. Maybe I should spin it around and show you. But Judge Dredd doesn't have any facial expression. He just has the grimace. It's very difficult to draw a face where the eyes and the mouth are not doing something. But somebody did say to me that one of my strengths is that my characters emote. Yeah. I think there are some artists who are very good at action and stuff like that. But I'm not a big action artist. But I do think that getting the characters on the page to somehow connect emotionally with the viewer is a big deal, I think.
I think that was even, I was not a big animal man. I didn't really know much about the comics till I started seeing your covers for it, and it captured me right away. That and the work you did on some of the Robin covers, just
oh yes.
There's one, my daughter actually picked it up. She's starting to get into comics, and I wish I had it with me, but it's Robin sort of hunched down, and there's this giant guy behind him, and he has sort of like a snake on his chest.
Yes, I remember that one. Yes.
And you saw, the way the shading and the shadows were, it just painted such a beautiful picture.
Oh, thanks very much. I remember my editor, I can't remember who the editor was, but he called out the 5-nipple cover. Because behind Robin or whoever it was, there are some Greek statues, and I drew them just as they were, and the female figures had nipples, and they had to be painted out. I think probably the main guy, he was a kind of kung fu kind of guy, the guy with the tattoo. I think he was shirtless, so he had to have a nipple. But you didn't see nipples in comics for a while on men. No, I mean, you wouldn't see them on women, but Hawkman never had any nipples, for instance.
Well,
it's very weird.
Strategically placed.
Sorry?
They had the strategically placed, straps
Oh, yes.
that went across.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Anyway, you were saying something nice about a Robin cover, and I got into nipples. I'm sorry about that.
It just,
It follows on naturally. Yeah.
So, out of curiosity, did at any point in your career you wanted to kind of dive into the world of Marvel?
Well, people seem to be aware that I've never really had a relationship with Marvel, and I was never a Marvel collector. I loved Howard the Duck. I had a collection of Howard the Duck, and I remember I had a collection of the early Silver Surfer, those lovely thick Silver Surfer editions with beautiful John Buscema art. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say another thing now, which is going to get me into trouble in the comics profession. I was never a Jack Kirby fan.
I was just going to add.
I grew to understand why he was so popular and why, but I only grew to understand that as a sort of, not as a boy, as a fan. I like Gil Kane and Murphy Anderson and some of those people. But my relationship with Marvel, I first did a few things for Marvel UK. Marvel was being published in Britain, and I did a Hulk cover. They didn't like the face I drew on him, so they stuck another one, somebody else, John Romita, I think, Hulk face over the top of the one I drew. And then I drew a She-Hulk cover with Howard the Duck as a guest star, and I got it in a day late. So they got somebody sitting in the bullpen to very quickly go over my rough, and that was the one that was published. And so I did a Spider-Man cover, which ended up on the inside. So a lot of the things I did for Marvel ended up turning up late, and that was my fault, and not being used. So I always felt there was a bit of a jinx between me and Marvel. I did a cover on a character called Hellstorm, I think. Marie Javins, who is now very high up in the world of DC, apparently was the editor of Marvel at the time. Mm-hmm. I quite enjoyed that. It wasn't colored very well. It was kind of swamped by the color.
As an artist, was there any particular character from either DC, Marvel, any line really, that you just really wanted to sink your teeth into and really?
Well, I mean, I'm a sort of dabbler. Being a cover artist, I can just draw a character or two characters. Just have the pleasure of drawing Plastic Man or something just mm-hmm. once, and then the next day I can draw somebody else. And so I've drawn pretty much everybody. There are very few characters that I would have loved to have had drawn Lady Blackhawk. I drew her a few times in pin-ups, and I thought she had the most fantastic outfit. Sexy, sort of leather kind of
leather jacket outfit. And hat.
Yeah, and the little leather skirt and the kind of peaked cap and everything.
Right.
And I've never really had a chance to draw her. I would have liked to have had a go at that.
Who was the inker that you felt captured your work the best?
Oh, good question. Well, I've never really... in Britain, we don't subdivide the labour into pencilers and inkers. We've never really had in Britain, and I'm not even sure it really applies in the rest of Europe. I don't think we've had pencilers, inkers, and colorists. I mean, in America, the stories are 25 pages long or so, and so you've got to divide up the labour to get that many pages out. So there was always pencilers and inkers. And I never had an inker until I worked at DC. So I was 7 years into my career before I ever saw my work regularly inked. I mean, my work was inked before then when I was going through a crisis or something, and Dave Gibbons inked a few of my pages and Kevin O'Neill a few. But when it came to Camelot 3000, I really had to swallow the fact that I was going to be inked permanently by somebody. And I was so not keen on the idea that I penciled the hell out of my pencil pages.
Right.
You know, even because I'm left-handed, and all my lines, I put them in pencil, going top left to bottom right, which is the way a left-hander would draw them. And poor old Bruce Patterson had to turn the page sideways or something and ink that way. Terry Austin took over halfway through, and he'd been very good on X-Men, and he had this very chunky, chisel sort of inking style, which was not at all like me, because I used to ink with a brush. So all of my lines were sort of scalloped and they came to a point. So I wasn't completely happy with the idea that Terry, but by the time we got to the end of the 12 issues, I think my drawing was getting more confident, and I really grew to really appreciate the combination of him and me, with me penciling and him inking on some of the final issues of Camelot.
Have you gotten to the point now, though, when you are asked to do something for DC or another company where you can ink your own stuff, or is it still the process as it was before, where you just send in the pencils and they'll let someone else take it from there?
No. I mean, nowadays I'm just a cover. I mean, I'm pretty much retired, although I am continually working. But everything I do is so-called penciled, inked, and coloured by me. So the sort of the process of penciling and inking and colouring is all in digital. It's all on the computer.
Gotcha.
So I don't have a piece of paper with pencil and or later with Indian ink on it at all. So if you're working in Photoshop, you know, you've got one layer which you fade out and it ends up looking like pale pencils, and then you just go over the top of that with a black line, and that you'd call that the ink. And so it really isn't, the labor isn't so different. So nowadays I insist on doing the whole thing myself.
How did you make that, or how did you find that transition from just having worked in that stuff myself? Did you find it easy making that transition from, You're
talking about digital?
Yeah, to digital, excuse me, yeah.
Well, I was a real thicko. I'd never owned a computer until, I got my first computer in 97, I think it was. And Dave Gibbons was my tutor. I went over to sit to his house and he showed me how to work in He was working in Photoshop, and I'd never seen anything like it in my life. And then Angus Mackay was very, very savvy with all that sort of stuff. But it took me months. I hated it. It took me months to get there. I could tell you why I insisted on doing it, but it took me a long time to get the hang of the computer. But now I couldn't possibly do anything seriously on paper anymore. You work digitally, do you?
Well, so I do a lot of, my whole family, we tend to do stuff. So I'm a video editor, and, I know Photoshop and various programs, but, growing up, even my wife as well, and our daughter, we like drawing. We've always been doodlers, drawers. And at one point I was like, let's try this. So, I got a tablet and I attempted to do stuff. And and I gave it the old college try, man. For a few months I would, try working with it, and the feeling, or that different, it didn't feel comfortable.
Have you given it up? Have you given it up then? Well,
I don't draw anymore. I don't have time for really anything nowadays. But when I do, I just do, either, pencil and paper or charcoal, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I find that the feeling, I just find it a little bit more gratifying.
That isn't your Christopher Reeve behind
no,
you,
no. That was given to me as a gift from someone who went to a convention. No, the only thing hanging up around here that I did was a goofy drawing that I did at Disney one year visiting.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. No, I wouldn't hang anything I did up. So
okay.
No, I find that very interesting. Like beyond, obviously our love for the work you do in the comics. There's other aspects of your career which I find very interesting when people, artists do this stuff. The medium, I think, is a very important aspect of the work as well. And we were talking to Tom Orzechowski, can't say his name, a few months back, and the transition from to digital was a big factor, I guess, for him at the time. And I just find it very interesting.
Can you just remind me what he does?
He's a letterer, so he does a lot of lettering for the McFarlane Spawn comics.
I see.
So I just find that interesting stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is one thing about working on a computer. I do get this sense of how disappointed people are when they hear you work digitally. They sort of say, what a pity he works digitally now. I mean, a lot of people will say that because they like collecting the artwork, but most people can't. But most people
are not
can't
going to get their hands on some of your work. Then. That's the concern. Damn. Not gonna...
I mean, most people are not going to be able to afford artwork, are they? So why they should be disappointed somehow? They say it's a pity he works digitally nowadays.
Yeah, I think that, there's something to be said about that. Like, when art is art, you think of it as something that you can touch. Something you could feel and touch. And I think we're all a bit desensitized nowadays with computers. So when you hear the medium that you love is now digital, it's like, oh, okay.
But I mean, for me, I'm just going out of frame for a second, but I'll get this one as well. I mean, for me, it was all about the finished object. I mean, I love getting my hands on. I mean, these are a couple of mine. I'm showing off my own stuff, but the process of making this sort of stuff, it's just a process towards having one of these that a million people can own if they want.
Right.
And I get no sense of disappointment personally, knowing that there isn't an original of that. You still have these wonderful objects that you can read if you want, or you can put them in a bag and just keep them forever.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Yeah, and also many people can own one for just a few dollars, can't they?
Yeah.
Whereas they can't own the artwork.
No, it's unfortunate.
So want to be mindful of your time. But
no, it's good. We're good.
Where can people find your current work or your stuff?
Well, I'm a cover guy. I mean, I've just shown you that Swamp Thing. It's just occasionally there's a new cover. I've just drawn a cover on a Barbarella comic for Dynamite. Is there a publisher called Dynamite? You can find me online. I mean, I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram. So I'm trying to get just a really large selection of the work I've done that I've forgotten, just sort of available just to have a look at on Instagram. But there are also a few books of my work you can pick up, still available. But that's really it. I'm not in any one place on a regular basis at the moment. I have had phases of being the regular artist on Flash or Wonder Woman or Batman or something, but at the moment somebody just emails me and say, hey, will you do me what did somebody ask me to do the other day? I mean, like the Barbarella. I'm also doing things. When I was doing Animal Man covers, I would always do a pencil rough, and you can see them online somewhere, and send them to the editor. Sometimes I'd do 2 or 3 of them, and one of them I would think, that would make a great cover, but the editor would choose a different one. Mm-hmm. And so I have all these covers that never got drawn, and I've just created 3 of them, which for Animal Man, which were never used at the time, which you can find online somewhere.
That's awesome.
You can find me somewhere.
Sounds good.
If you look hard enough, you'll find me somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm trying to spread myself around as much as I can, really.
Nothing wrong with that.
No.
Well, Oren, do you have anything else?
No, I just want to thank you so much. Your art has been such a big part of our life and our love of comics. So thank you for all your work, and thank you for so much wonderful art through the years.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your attention.
Not a problem.
Well, have a good one.
Yeah.
Everyone, please, if you have questions, comments, like and subscribe by all means. Please look for Brian's work on, as you said, he can be found on
I can be found.
social media.
You can Google me. You can also buy a few comics that have my covers on.
So that was our interview with Brian Bolland. Pretty interesting, right? Now, I don't know if anyone else noticed this, but when we were interviewing that gentleman, his comic book rack started to move. Okay. He had a spinner rack over his right shoulder, and it started to turn for no apparent reason.
I mean, it could be ghosts. It is time for the Halloween, even though we spoke to him a little while back. But I really loved this interview. I love talking to him. I love the fact that he had no idea why the Joker was wearing a Hawaiian shirt and a hat in The Killing Joke. It was just something, Alan Moore created. So I thought that was pretty fascinating.
I think all English homes are required to have a ghost. That's just my impression
sense.
from, what I've seen on TV and movies. But yeah, it sort of fits, the Halloween theme, and great to hear from Mr. Bolland on many a range of topic. And you know what? You don't have to know why he has a Hawaiian shirt.
No.
It's just cool.
No.
And the way Brian Bolland draws it, you don't need a reason.
No.
It's true.
I think. But anyway, enough about that. Enough about ghosts. Enough about Hawaiian shirts. It is time to say goodbye, and we say goodbye by doing this. Rate, review, subscribe. If you are watching us on YouTube, know that we are a podcast. If you are listening to us on your podcast platform of choice, know that we are on YouTube. We are also on social, DB Bandits on Twitter, Dollar Bin Bandits on Facebook and Instagram. Where else? Oh, yeah, you can write us an old-fashioned email, dollarbinbandits@gmail.com. I don't believe we've received one yet. So you can just write an email that says first, how people used to do at the top of comments. And, that would be glorious for us. So please write to us. We're lonely. And tune in next week for the next episode of Dollar Bin Bandits.